Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hi everyone. As you know, All Home Care Matters is here to provide helpful tips, resources, and information for you and your loved ones. Today's resource is brought to you by ADA. For many of us, we may think of COVID-19 as being over, but for many of us, it is still a great concern, especially if we have existing health conditions or are in a certain age group. Did you know that nearly 75% of American adults have at least one risk factor that puts them at high risk of progressing to severe COVID-19? And many are unaware of their risk. That's why I recently took a free health questionnaire powered by ADA, one of the world's leading digital health companies, to learn more about my risk status and discover if I am eligible for treatment that could reduce the severe effects of COVID-19. Let me tell you, it was quick and easy. By taking the questionnaire in the comfort of your home, you get important information on your risk status, but also easily get connected to an affordable telehealth provider ready to speak with you within 2 hours to learn about treatment options. The questionnaire is endorsed and trusted by doctors and healthcare experts, and it only takes a few minutes. So click on the link to take ADA's free questionnaire today, and let's all stay safe and healthy. Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, we are honored to welcome Tracy Crump, author, editor, and public speaker. Welcome, Tracy. How are you today?
I'm doing fine, Lance. I'm glad to be here.
It's our pleasure to have you, Tracy. Thank you so much for your time. I want to kind of start with what got you involved with, helping people through these books, devotions, and speaking on illnesses and caregiving. Where does your story originate from?
Well, it really started, years ago now. I worked as an ICU nurse. And so I write about some experiences that I had there, but I also write about some caregiving experiences I had. And that really started with my mother. And the funny thing is, Lance, that she started out being the caregiver. My dad had multiple health issues for a long time, and she was basically his caregiver. She handled. Now he could still drive, he could still get on the riding lawnmower and mow the yard, but he was getting more and more limited. And she was kind of the dynamics behind their household. She handled their finances. She was just the drive behind everything they did. She was just a very smart lady, very sweet lady. But we started noticing some memory problems. And we finally got her to a gerontologist who diagnosed her with mild cognitive disorder. He said it may develop into something worse or it may not.
Yeah.
So for about a year and a half, they just kind of rocked along on their own. Now, they lived just about a mile from us, which was a blessing in the end. And so they rarely called on me for anything. They just kind of, took care of things there. But then one summer, my mom just started going downhill. Her memory was getting much, much worse. And plus, we started noticing some odd motor symptoms. She would do things like she would walk on the side of her foot, and she would lean to the side, or she would lean forward and not even realize she was doing it. I would say, "Is your stomach hurting?" And she'd say, "No." Like, "Why are you asking?" And so I just thought something's wrong. And then one day she also had some personality changes. Like I said, she was always a very, very sweet person. And she just started snapping at my dad all the time. One time he asked me, I was over there at their house, and he asked me to go get him something off the table. And she just screeched at him. She said, "You can do it. You're just being lazy." And I thought, "Oh, where did that come from? That is not my mom." And so I started taking her to doctors. We went to her primary care physician first, and he ordered an MRA, which is a more specialized MRI, and didn't really see anything particular on that. Now, I did learn later that she did have some small infarcts, some kind of like little mini strokes that showed up on there, but it wasn't really enough to explain all her symptoms. And so he asked her, was she dizzy? And she said, yeah, sometimes she was. And so he sent us next to an ENT doctor who he said it may be an inner ear problem. And so he tested her and he said, yeah, that's what it is. And had us doing some exercises and we did those and didn't help none. So next I said, well, I really think we need to go to a neurologist. I said, something's wrong. And so he sent us to one and the neurologist did just kind of a cursory memory test. And he said, she's got dementia. Just like that, just right in front of her. And I said, well, I understand because she's got these other symptoms too. And he said, I said, and she had passed out at that time. She passed out a couple of times standing in the kitchen cooking. And he said, I think she has something called neurocardiogenic syncope. He kind of turned her this way, turned her that way, and it made her really dizzy. He said, you need to go to the cardiologist and get a tilt table test. So we went to the cardiologist, and they did the test. And yes, she did have neurocardiogenic syncope. They put in a pacemaker and what that is that the more you stand, normally your body adjusts for different positions. It increases your blood pressure as you stand so that the blood can circulate and get to your brain. And in this case, the more you stand, the more your blood pressure and heart rate drop. And so then she would pass out. Well, they put a pacemaker in, which helped that problem, but she still had these other issues. And she was just deteriorating constantly. And I'll tell you, Lance, during this time, we were going from one doctor to another. At night, I could not sleep. Having been a nurse before, I felt like I should be able to figure this out. There's something wrong. I knew in my heart something else was wrong. We were missing something. And so I was awake night after night after night, just thinking, what could be? And Lance, my faith is very important to me. And I would pray night after night, Lord, please give me wisdom. Please show me where we need to go. Show me what's wrong. And night after night, I would basically give that to the Lord, over to the Lord, and then suddenly I would think, we haven't checked this. And I would just take it right back. And so I went on like this for at least a month, and I was exhausted. I would be up till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I was like, this is stupid. I need rest, and I couldn't sleep. And finally, one night, I said, Lord, I'm trying to play God here. It's not in my hands. It's in yours. I've done everything I know to do.
Right.
And so I finally just gave it over to him. And as I fell asleep that night, suddenly a memory came back of a friend whose dad had similar symptoms. And I thought, what was that he had? And 3 words came to mind, which will probably mean nothing to your audience, but it was normal pressure hydrocephalus. I thought, And so the next morning, I looked it up, and she had all the cardinal signs of it. It was memory loss, balance problems, trouble walking, falling. I don't think at that time she'd actually started falling, but also incontinence, and it can be urinary or intestinal incontinence, and it doesn't have to be severe. But of course, what older lady doesn't have memory problems and falling and incontinence if they've had a baby? And so, can be very vague symptoms, not just oh yeah, okay, she's got these symptoms. That's what it is. But the next time we went to neurologist, I brought it up and said, do you think she could have normal pressure hydrocephalus? And he said, no. And I said, how do you know? And he said, because the MRI doesn't show it. Fortunately, I had done my homework and I knew that it doesn't always show up. Right. So I said, isn't it true that the MRI is not always definitive? Isn't there a specialized test you could do? And I knew there was. And he said, well, yeah, he kind of backed off. He said, yeah, but you would have to go to a neurosurgeon. I said, okay. And so he sent us to a neurosurgeon. Well, by the time we got in with him, she had started falling and she was doing worse and worse. And so when we went to the neurosurgeon, I brought it up again. I said, do you think she could have normal pressure hydrocephalus? And he said, no. Deja vu, we've been here before. I said, so I just asked him the same thing. How do you know? And he said, well, the MRI doesn't show it. And he said, let me see her walk. And so she walked, and he said, see, she can lift her feet, so she doesn't have it. But I remembered that one time when we were going up the stairs to get into my house, I just have 3 steps to get into the back door. And she stopped all of a sudden. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I can't lift my feet." She said, "It feels like they're stuck to the ground." And I told him that. And well, he said, "She doesn't have that." And I said, "Well," I said, "Isn't there a specialized test that we can do to make sure?" He said, "Well, yeah." He said, "We can." But he made me feel like a bad daughter for even asking.
Right.
It's not a pleasant test. You have to have a lumbar puncture, a spinal tap, and then you have to go back 3 days in a row for scans. And so he said, "We can do that if you really want to." It's like, you're just wanting to push it, you're just a needy daughter or something. And so I said, "Well, let me talk to my dad." It really wasn't my decision to make, but I said, "Let me talk to my dad." And he said, "Okay." Well, this was right before Christmas, and nothing happens around Christmas time in the medical industry. And so shortly after Christmas, and I had talked to my dad, and we finally came to the conclusion that we needed to go do this. We need to give her every chance that we could. Because Lance, by this time, she had gotten to the point where she couldn't walk. She couldn't talk except maybe answer 1 or 2 words to a question. And her memory was nil. She couldn't remember anything for 10 seconds.
Mm.
Now, shortly after Christmas, she had a bad fall and ended up in the hospital. She also had a urinary tract infection. And so the neurosurgeon did come by, and I said, "Can we do the test now?" And he said, "No, we have to set it up." So I said, "Okay." So she ended up coming back home, and we were having more and more trouble taking care of her. I was trying to be over there as much as I could, but I couldn't be there 24/7. And so her primary care physician said, "Why don't we put her in a skilled nursing facility and see if we can get her some rehab and see if that could help?" Like I say, at the time we still didn't know what was wrong. So I said okay. And that was one of the hardest times in my life, was telling her, "We're going to put you in this facility," because not really knowing whether she would be able to come home. And she, I thought I was going to get a lot of pushback, and she just said, "Okay." Flat affect. She didn't know what was going on. So we put her in there. And the day that we got her admitted, I was up there with her. Just so happened that the doctor who oversaw the facility was making rounds. Now, she only made rounds about every 3 weeks. So I feel once again that this was God's hand on the whole situation.
Absolutely.
And I just dumped on her for about 20 minutes. I told her everything we'd been through, what we were thinking. And she said, "Normal pressure hydrocephalus has really been in the news a lot here lately," which I had never seen it. It was on like programs like 2020 or some of those
Right.
news programs. She said, "The learning curve is going straight up on this." She said, "We don't know much about it." She said, "You only have one mother." She said, "You need to do everything you can for her." That was all the encouragement I needed. And so I started pushing the doctor to go ahead and get this scheduled, and let's do this. So they finally did. It's called a cisternogram. And this was, like 3 months later after all this started, maybe 2.5, 3 months. Finally got the test, found out she did have normal pressure hydrocephalus. And the treatment for it is to put in a shunt. And she made an amazing turnaround after that. I felt like I had my mom after the surgery.
Tracy, did the shunt go into the spine for the extra cerebral spinal fluid, or does it go into the brain?
It goes into the brain. Let me kind of explain normal pressure
Yeah, please.
hydrocephalus.
Yeah.
It's normally we have cerebral spinal fluid that bathes the brain and the spinal cord, and it circulates, and then it comes back up into the brain and is reabsorbed in a ventricle in the brain, little opening or cell in the brain. And if there's anything that blocks that flow or anything that keeps it from being reabsorbed, then the cerebral spinal fluid builds up and puts pressure against the brain. You've probably heard of babies
Yeah.
born with
Hydrocephalus.
hydrocephalus. They call it water on the brain, and their skulls, of course, are flexible. The plates are not fused, and so they can expand, and their heads literally get huge. But in adults, that can't happen. Our
Where to
our
go?
our heads, right? Their heads are fused, and so it just builds up gradually, more gradually usually than babies, but gradually, and presses against the brain. And of course, it's like having a brain tumor growing in your brain. It stops the brain function. And they are finding more and more that this does happen in older adults. So what they did was they put a shunt into that ventricle to drain, and they ran it like a little tube underneath the skin down into the peritoneum, into the abdomen, and it constantly drained that fluid out of her brain. So within 3 days, she made an amazing turnaround. She was still in the skilled nursing facility. And I remember one day being up there with her, and an aide and a nurse were in there, and were talking. Of course, they shaved her head. It's brain surgery, so they shaved her head to put this shunt in. One of the aides was saying, she said, you can get some cute little caps to wear. I know people with cancer. She said, wear these cute little caps. And I said, okay, I'll look into that. Well, about 10 minutes after they left, Mom said, those caps she was talking about, I to get one of those. And I said, you remembered what she said? Up until that point, she would never have remembered. And she was making complete sentences. Her sense of humor returned. It was just an amazing turnaround.
That's remarkable because, you had the advantage of being an ICU nurse, so you had a lot more medical knowledge and insight than somebody who doesn't. And, to still see the pushback and almost I don't want to say disregard, but almost the nonchalant attitude towards your advocacy, you weren't given maybe the same respect that, maybe if you had been a physician that you would have received. How would a family, and we'll go back to your mom in a minute, but how would a family watching or listening to this, because I know countless families, and countless families who, first they get that white coat syndrome. They get nervous and intimidated, and they don't want to speak up. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. So they don't really get their voices heard, or they feel like when they do speak up, their voice still isn't heard. What advice would you give to families on how important it is to, if you believe in something or you want something for your loved one, to, not give up and to, keep at it so that, you do get your voices heard? How do you recommend they go about advocating for their loved ones?
Right. Well, I honestly think that if you feel in your heart that something else is wrong, that you keep pushing. First of all, it was important that I had done my homework. I knew that the MRI was not the final say. And you don't have to be a nurse to get online and do research. And I highly recommend that you do that. I do recommend that you be careful what sites you go to.
Right.
Everybody's out there giving advice, and they're not always right. So go to like the Mayo Clinic, the National Institute of Health, just some of the larger sites. Even WebMD has some good information on there. So I would definitely recommend doing your homework if you come up with anything that you think might be an issue, or just Google the symptoms. But just be careful what sites you go to, and then keep saying, be respectful. I think it's important not to become enemies with your doctor. That will work against you. But I say just keep pushing and keep pushing. And if you have to, go to a different doctor. Now, we ended up later, and I'll tell about this in a minute. We ended up later with a different neurosurgeon, which he was a huge blessing. When you've got the right doctor. But if you have to, go to a different doctor. Now, we did explore everything. We went by what her primary care physician said, and he was trying for her. He was working in her behalf. But I just knew that these things were not working for her. So we kept trying.
Just out of curiosity, when you did get the diagnosis and they did confirm it was normal hydrocephalus pressure, what did that her first neurosurgeon, did he have any feedback, or what was that conversation like?
Well, actually, he walked into the room and he said, well, even if we do surgery on her, she's still going to have dementia because of these little infarcts that they had found.
Sure.
And I said, it was just like out of the blue. And I said, well, she doesn't have normal pressure hydrocephalus, right? And he said, yeah, she does. He didn't want to do the surgery.
Wow.
He thought we were wasting our time. He honestly did not want to do it.
Is there a reason? Her age, or the risk, or because it showed that he was wrong?
Probably all three.
Yeah.
And and it may have been a little bit of he thought we were going to, and it was we had her for 3 more years, and they were not easy 3 years.
Sure.
And he may have felt like he was saving us, the trouble, I guess, of going through what we went through after that. But it was important to me. I mean, it was important to me to give my mom every chance she could have. She would have done it for me.
Sure.
So I think it's probably all of the above. I think I can't tell you exactly what his reasoning was.
Well, and you mentioned that you did end up switching to a new neurosurgeon. What was the cause or reason for that? Or
Well, after about 7 or 8 months after she had the original surgery, she started going downhill again. And I would say a lot of times it was the personality changes that I noticed first. I would call it a case of the uglies. She would get really ugly, and she'd start kind of stumbling and things like, well, not that she ever regained her mobility completely, but she would just start having problems. So finally I went back to him, and he pressed on it had like a little hump or something up here. He pressed on that and said, it's working fine. Because I thought maybe the shunt is getting clogged up. I had read once again up on it, and they can get clogged up.
okay.
And he said, no, it's fine. There's nothing else you can do. He was just going to let her go. So I talked to her her primary care physician again, and I said, I need another neurosurgeon. So he got us in with one. This man was wonderful. I wish I could clone him and make him every doctor, because he gave me his cell phone number, his home number. He said, call me anytime. And he did a test on her, and he said, yes, it's the shunt is clogged. And so he put in a new one. And actually, the first shunt that the first neurosurgeon had put in had no valve in it. So every time she changed position quickly, like she sat up in bed, to get up in the mornings, all the fluid would drain down immediately, and she would have a horrible headache. Well, he put one in with a valve that prevented that slowly let the fluid drain down. And so that was much better. And so then she came back around, and she started doing better again. And he stuck with us. I mean, he was just an amazing doctor.
Wonderful. What other ongoing issues or did your mother have besides from like the fluid and things like that after she had the surgery? Did you notice an improvement in her memory? Did her attitudes and
Her
person?
mem-
Okay.
right. Her memory and her speech, her sense of humor came back. What really never came back was her mobility, not completely. While we were still in the skilled nursing facility, she had the surgery while she was there and came back. They did rehab on her, did physical therapy on her, but it was very limited there. It just was not, that's just the type of facility it was. And so while she was there, I was working to get her into another very intensive rehab at the hospital. And this is something I would like for your listeners to know too, that at one point,
Yeah.
Medicare was about to kick her out.
Sure.
She had kind of come up on the maximum
21
number
days.
right. But there is a number that you can call, and they are required to give it to you, that you can get basically a go-between, somebody that will help advocate for you, keep them from kicking her out. And since I was in the process of trying to get her into this intensive rehab, they advocated for us, and they kept her in there until we could get her moved.
Is that
And
the
so,
ombudsman? Is that who you're referring to?
no,
No.
no, I should have looked it up. I can't remember. It's a number. They'll give it to you, like if you're in the hospital, and you think that they're about to,
You're
kick
protesting
you
the
out.
decision, right? Yeah.
Right, exactly. And they'll look into it and help advocate for you.
What so I want to go back to the dementia also. So, originally mom's diagnosed with having dementia. They didn't think she had these other issues going on. Then it was confirmed that she did. You had the surgery, and there's a drastic improvement except for the mobility. Would you say, or was she still classified or diagnosed as having dementia?
Um, yeah, but I think it was just mild dementia. I don't. They really didn't mention it after
Okay.
that. Her memory was much better, but she never got to the point where she could take care of herself, much less my dad after
Okay.
that. Like I said, we went through that intensive rehab. but she never fully regained. She could use a walker for a little while, but she finally got to the point where we got her a motorized chair and she could use that.
Okay.
So she was never able to care for herself or my dad. But she did improve. Her memory was much better. Conversing, everything like that was much better. Just the mobility. And I will always regret that, because if we could have gotten her diagnosed earlier, I think that would not have been an issue as it was.
So that also was related to the normal pressure hydrocephalus.
Right, right.
I just
So
Yeah, go ahead.
go ahead. No, go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, I wonder how many people watching or listening to this, or that are even out there, that have the exact experience you've had, where their loved one may have this and it's being misdiagnosed as a form of dementia. Do you know any
Mhm.
numbers on that, or any stories?
I don't know numbers, but I know at least two other people just in our neighborhood who've
Wow.
had the same, well, not the same experience, but they were diagnosed with normal pressure hydrocephalus. So it's not as uncommon as you would think.
Yeah.
And just like that doctor told me in the facility, she said, our learning curve is going straight up. She said, we are not diagnosing it like we should. And I don't ever want to give anybody false hope,
Sure.
because you know, Alzheimer's is much more prevalent.
Right.
But if there's any possibility, and this is why I talk about this as much as I do, if there's any possibility that this could be the problem, I urge people to look into it. Because just like my mom, she couldn't advocate for herself. Got to the point she couldn't even talk. She didn't know what was going on. So we have to be their advocates.
And Tracy, what would have happened if you weren't advocating and you weren't questioning these things and it went untreated?
I do believe that she would have died just within maybe a few weeks or a few months. She
Wow.
was to the point she was going
Really?
downhill that fast.
Wow. And how was Dad dealing and managing all this, being, a spousal caregiver, and I don't know how old they were at the time. That had to be quite trying on him as well.
It was. In fact, once she came home, we had to get caregivers. He could not. He had very poor balance himself, and he had, before she went into the skilled nursing facility, he was wearing himself out trying to follow her around and make sure she didn't fall again. And he was just not up to that. And so we got caregivers. We started out with an in-home agency. And I thought, well, if you have an in-home agency, they'll always have somebody available to be on call. And so we worked it out. We kind of got our routine going. They would come during the day, and then Dad would kind of, after dinner, they would make sure they got all their meals. After dinner, then Dad would kind of watch over her with the phone at hand. I was just a mile away. Call me if he needed, and then I would come back just about 8:30 at night and get her ready for bed and get her into bed. So we started out with the agencies, and we had some really, really, really sweet, I call them sitters, but people to come. But I got twice at 4 o'clock in the morning, I got a call saying, we don't have anybody today. The lady that was going to come is not available, and I can't find anybody else. So I had to go over there and stay the day. And I thought, this is just not working for us. And of
Right.
course, it is expensive. We were very fortunate that my mom she'd worked in the banking industry for years, and she was very good with finances. And they were not rich by any means, but she had always been very conservative with their money. They took a hit in 2008, as everybody else did with the downturn, but they still, as long as we were careful with their money, they were able to afford caregivers. But of course, it is expensive. So I started looking for private caregivers, and I just put out feelers everywhere. We had homeschooled our sons before this, and so I was still part of a homeschool loop. And I sent out messages there. I asked at our church. I asked at other churches. Did anybody know anyone who would be willing to or able to do caregiving? Just sitting with my parents, with elderly people. And my dad, as intelligent, and he was fine. I mean, mentally he was fine, just physically he was not. But he'd never been one to even cook a meal, so I knew that wasn't going to happen. And so we started finding some people. We only had one bad experience, but we early on we found one lady and she stayed with us for 4 years. I
Oh,
called her my right hand woman, and she was wonderful. And we found other wonderful caregivers. They all had different gifts
sure.
and personalities that just ministered to my parents. But we found one after another, and they would stay from they would come at 7 o'clock in the morning. My mom was an early riser, and if somebody wasn't there at 7 o'clock, she was not happy.
Right.
So we had them from 7 until 5, and like I said, then my dad watched after, and then I came in the evening, and we had just a wonderful experience with them.
Good. Good.
Mom lived for 3 years, and we kept them. We were able to keep them in their home all that time.
Wonderful. Did your father, did he get to a point at any time where then he started requiring caregivers? Or
He did. Probably, oh gosh, at least 2.5 years after my mom's surgery. I won't go into all the details, but he developed appendicitis,
oh,
ended up in the hospital, and they did surgery. But then after surgery, he had what was called an ileus, where the bowel doesn't wake up. And so they had to put a tube down to drain his stomach contents while they're waiting for the bowel to wake up. And he vomited and aspirated. I don't want to be too graphic. He already had severe pulmonary problems, severe cardiac problems. Well, this just started a downhill slide. And he ended up in kidney failure, ended up on dialysis. They had to drain 50, he weighed 50 pounds. They drained 50 pounds of fluid off. I mean, weighed 50 pounds. He had 50 extra pounds of fluid on him that they had to drain off when they finally did dialysis. So he spent 3 months going between hospital and rehab, back to the hospital, back to rehab. And all this time, of course, I'm having to try and find care. I'm trying to spend as much time up there with him as I could and still, oversee everything at home. At one point, my mom had some problems and they were both in the hospital at the same time. So
wow.
I was riding the elevator from one floor to the other, taking care of both of them. But she started deteriorating again. And it just was to the point that there was really nothing more that we could do. He ended up on hospice, and this is while he was still in rehab. And he got to come home one time and see her once again, and she ended up passing away while he was still in rehab. And he came home the day after her death, or day after her funeral, on 24/7 oxygen, wound care, dialysis 3 days a week, home health, physical therapy, and no time to grieve my
So
mom.
I was going to say, when he's grieving and you're grieving, and now you're also, managing his care needs. Why did they not put him into rehab facility for a while?
My dad
Yeah.
in rehab, well, he did. He was back and
Oh,
forth.
this is okay.
Yeah,
All right. So
back
okay.
and forth from the
After he was
hospital.
discharged, he went into rehab.
Right.
Okay.
You talking about at home rehab? They had some home physical therapy,
Okay.
but yeah, but well, he had done pretty much all the rehab that he could do.
Okay.
Yeah, and like I say, he just was one to take care of things, and his balance. He had peripheral neuropathy, which made his feet very numb. He said it felt like he was walking on rockers, and he said, it just threw his balance off. It's called ataxia, where you don't have any balance. And so, he was always a fall risk, and he did have a motorized chair too, and so we kind of basically got that started so that he used that all the time. But we kept the same caregivers that we'd had before, and so he lived in his home for another year after my mom passed away miraculously, and I just praise God for this. That after 4 months he came off dialysis,
Oh, wonderful.
which was, yes, it was wonderful. All that going back and forth, taking him to
Yeah.
dialysis and all that was wonderful. So he continued to live at home for a year. However, we finally made the decision for him to go into assisted living. And the decision was more because of finances.
Mhm.
And I know this sounds kind of funny because assisted living is also very expensive. But in addition to paying the extra money for the caregivers, now they owned their home outright. They
Sure.
didn't have a mortgage, which was wonderful. But there's always something with the home. Of course, you've got your utilities, you've got
Taxes.
anything breaks down. I know one time I walked in and our main caregiver, Joan, she had her head in the refrigerator pulling stuff out. She said the refrigerator's gone out. We
Oh,
gotta get a new friend. That's going on. Oh gosh. It was always something. They lived on a lot that had 1,000 trees. And if a tree died, that's another $800,000 to take the tree down. It was just always some
right.
expense. And so I started running the numbers, and it was actually cheaper for him to go into assisted living and live there. So we talked about it and he agreed to it. And so we started that process.
So, I just want to touch on that really quickly because, and you'll probably agree with this, and I'd love your thoughts as well. Assisted living can be cheaper or it can be more than having home care and having staff come to the home to care for a loved one. So
Mhm.
I know in our experience, we have actually quite a few families who made that same decision, went into assisted living, but then within a week or two, the assisted living is now telling the family, your loved one doesn't fit our criteria to live here without additional support. So then they make the family decide, do you want them to move out? Do you want to move them into our locked unit, which is more like a rehab nursing home unit, which is extremely expensive because Medicare is
Mm.
not paying for that or for assisted living? Or you can bring in outside staff to supplement because assisted living, I just want to clarify, they don't have caregivers with them 24/7 or even for an hour at a time. And with your dad's needs, I'm a little surprised that, he met that criteria to live there without having additional help. Or did you guys end up needing additional help?
No, fortunately we didn't. It was
Okay,
a very good
good.
facility. And you're right. Yeah, it's individual. You have to look at the numbers. I would go and meet with, and I toured several assisted living facilities, and you have to see what their requirements are. You're absolutely right. But fortunately, because he did have, a good memory, and he was fine cognitively, he just had these health issues, and he needed somebody to manage his medicines. Took a ton of medication, and he needed somebody to prepare his meals, and just basically be there. Now, I will tell you this too, Lance. I feel for people who have to run up to the assisted living, or that they want them to stay there or have somebody there. It was a load off my shoulders when he
Absolutely.
went into assisted living, but you're still the caregiver. You
Right.
are still the primary caregiver. I went up there. I would get called in the middle of the night if he fell or had some problem, take him to the emergency room. I still took him to every doctor's appointment. I was afraid he was going to go back on dialysis, and we would be doing that 3 days a week. You are still the primary caregiver,
Right.
and you're still the one on call. You're still the one they call to see, consult on anything. So it's still a lot to do. You're still the
And
caregiver.
I don't know if you'd agree with this, Tracy. I like to equate it to, it's almost like it's a hotel for seniors. You know, the
Mhm.
the maids and the housekeeping, the cooks, they're not staying in the room with your loved one. They can
Mhm.
call down if they need something. You can get a la carte, have the meds brought to you at your designated time. Some of them offer showering service, and you get on a schedule. But people that are a fall risk, people that wander, people that need help every time they're using the restroom, that's not what assisted living is designed for. And a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
families, don't realize that until it's already too late. We had one family recently. The son lived out of state, and he knew his mom's condition very superficially. He wasn't on site, and our case
Mhm.
managers are giving reports, and the daughter lived here. She was more on site. She's trying to convince her brother, mom isn't going to do good in assisted living. She says, I went and talked to several of them. And the brother, in all of his wisdom, though, decided he knew best. And so he sold the house. Mom went in assisted living. And within 7 days, the daughter, she's calling frantically. We sold mom's house. She has to get out of the facility, or we have to hire 24/7 care. So now, because she's such a liability, because this woman has very advanced dementia, she's
Mhm.
an extreme fall risk, and they can't be and she wanders, and assisted living, you can come and go as you please. She could wander out and start walking down the street, and now she's lost. And so they had to hire our services, and end result is they, were recommended get mom a 1-bedroom apartment because it's going to be a lot less expensive, because they need the 24/7 care regardless. Otherwise, or, she'll have to go into a locked unit, and they didn't want that for their mother either. And the locked units are, more specialized for memory care, and they can be very, very expensive. So they're a good fit, it sounds like, for your dad when they're still cognitively fine, physically, still okay, because they can provide meals, they can provide the medications, but when you need that hands-on assistance, that's not what they're designed for.
Right, right. And once again, you have to do your research.
Have to do your research and
Absolutely.
ask the tough questions, because this particular family, the brother was very, very upset because he kept going back to, well, they told me they had 24-hour nursing care. And we explained to them they have 24-hour nursing care available by phone. They're not going to have an RN there at 1 a.m. It's not 24-hour care where they're going to be with your mother 24/7. Just make sure you're asking direct questions and making sure you understand what they do and do not provide. Because once you sign that paperwork, you're in there, so,
Right.
and they're great if you still have a lot of abilities and you're fairly independent. But if you really need care and that's why you're moving in there, you might want to really examine what they provide and what they don't provide.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, we were very fortunate because this facility probably did more than what they were supposed to do. We had wonderful nurses there, and they would kind of watch after him. But you're right, they're not in there 24/7.
Right. Uh,
Absolutely.
how did your dad adjust to the move? Because I mean, that's, with his health issues and the passing of his wife and your mom, he was going through a lot of transition during that time. Did he adjust good to it?
Not at
No.
first.
Okay.
No. Of course, he was still on like fluid restriction and other dietary restrictions because he had been in kidney failure, and we were trying to keep him from going back on dialysis. So I had talked to the nurses ahead of time and told them, we need to really limit his sodium. We need to watch his fluids, only this much per meal. Well, he didn't like being told. Now we'd already been kind of doing that we had been doing that at home, but for some reason, I think all the change just really hit him, and he did not want to be told. I mean, he was not going to be told that he couldn't use his salt shaker. He loved salt. So I finally had, they would call me and say he's using the salt shaker. So I finally had to say, just back off. Just back off, let him do what he wants to do. If we end up on dialysis again, then we do. I just, it was just a tug of war, and I just wasn't going to have that. That wasn't good for anybody. So finally, he kind of settled in. It was just hard, and I think a lot of it was, the move. They had been in that house for 40 years, and I'm telling you, cleaning that house out was an experience. But and like you say, he had lost mom. It had been a year since that she had passed away, but still, it was a lot of change for an 80-something-year-old. He was in his mid 80s by this time. And but he finally kind of settled in. The funny thing is, though, Lance, the staff would come to me sometimes and say, "I think your dad's depressed. Maybe he needs some antidepressants." And I asked them why, and they said, "Well, he won't participate in anything. He was going to meals. They required that they go down to the lunchroom for meals, which I think was a good thing,
Yeah.
because they would converse with other residents there." And so finally, I kind of just started watching and seeing what it was exactly he was doing. My dad was always a loner. He'd always been a sedentary person. He had his tablet he would play games on. For one spell, he would go to their library. They had a little library there and check out books and read those, which he'd never been really much of a reader before. So that was kind of different for him. And he would participate. He would, always go to Walmart. He loved to shop. That was the funniest thing when he got older, that he started loving to shop. He and mom would always go shopping together. So he would get on that bus and go shopping. So I knew he was not depressed. No, he didn't participate in their exercises. He thought that was silly. They would sit in the chair and do arm exercises, like this. And they said, I'm not doing that. And sometimes he would go to bingo, but he didn't want to do these little crafts that they did. That just wasn't his
Yeah.
thing. So I finally told him he's not depressed. Just leave him alone.
That's who he is.
That's
Yeah,
right. Exactly.
absolutely. Sure. What was it like for you? Because you were a mile from your mom and dad's house, and now how far were you from the facility you guys found?
It wasn't bad. It was about 15 minutes away,
Oh,
and it was the little town that I would go grocery shopping and everything. So I would stop in there, every time I went into town, or of course I was there anytime that they needed me,
sure.
anytime something happened. And I would go some of the things that he couldn't, like larger things, items that he wanted. I have to tell you, he liked to drink beer. And they allowed him to do that there,
Really?
which I was, yeah. And this was a Methodist facility, so I was kind of surprised. But so I would have to go buy his big big bundle of beer and bring that to him. But it was just, it was not far, so that was a huge blessing.
Okay.
So it was okay. And as I say, it really was a weight off my shoulders. I didn't. Once we sold his house, which we sold just within a few months, it's in our neighborhood, and my husband and I walk a lot. And I would walk past the house, and I would see a dead tree, and I think, "Oh, we've got to get somebody to come take care of that tree." And then I realized it's not my responsibility anymore. I don't have to worry about it.
I want to ask you, just kind of off topic, but still the same thing. What's it like when you walk by and you realize that's not mom and dad's house anymore?
Yeah. Well, for a while, it would kind of tug at my heart a little bit, because like I said, they had lived there for 40 years. Now, I never lived there. I was already married when they moved there. But it was hard because I can picture every room. And of course people make changes to the house, and you're
Right.
kind of watching to see what they've done. But it's okay. It's okay. It's like I say, it's not my responsibility anymore. But it does bring back memories.
Yeah, yeah. Does your dad have any meaningful memories or experiences at the facility while he was there that really stand out to you?
Well, now he has passed away. He lived there for 2 more years and passed away. But I'll tell you this: one time, the activities director, she paired up some of the residents with children at a first and second graders, I think it was, at a local elementary school as kind of pen pals.
Oh, fun.
And yeah, I walked in one day and there was a stack of construction paper cards in there. And I said, "What's this?" And he said, "Oh, those are from my pen pals." And I said, "What?" Of course, his peripheral neuropathy, he couldn't write
Yeah.
much anymore. He could sign his name and that was about it. And I said, "How are you writing to pen pals?" And he said, "Well, I don't remember the lady's name, Barbara, I think it was. She said she writes the letters for me." But I looked through them. They were so sweet. Now I think this was around Christmas time, and they were talking about the elf on the shelf, things like that. He said, "I don't know what this fascination is with elves." So I had to explain all that to him. And they were just so sweet, telling him what they wanted for Christmas and asking how he was. They were just, very, very very connecting. I actually wrote a story for Chicken Soup for the Soul called Generation to Generation about that later. But they invited him to their Valentine banquet
Oh,
party.
nice.
He didn't want to go. He didn't feel good. He was old and cranky. He just didn't want to go. And so Barbara talked him into it. And so he went. I'm telling you, Lance, it changed his life. It
Wow.
changed it really did. It made such an impact on him. He said the kids came up to him, like they wanted a time and talked to him. He was always a carver. He would carve. He was very artistic. And when he could still use his fingers well, he would carve all kinds of little really odd things. And so he took some of his carvings to show them and explain to them. And they were just fascinated. They just loved it. And so it just, I mean, I can't tell you what a difference it made. In fact, everybody at the facility said, "Have you talked to your dad about going to this party?" We can't believe how much it really has touched him.
Wow.
And but within a month, he had passed away. He
Mhm.
passed away just suddenly. And so I had to tell the teacher, and she had to tell the kids, and they just cried.
Wow.
And so it still brings tears to my eyes. But I did write that story, and a year later, when the story came out in Chicken Soup for the Soul, I was able to go to the school, and that same teacher actually moved up to second grade with that class. And so I was able to read that story and talk to the kids in that class that he talked to. And so that was kind of a closure for me. That was a very sweet experience for me to get to do.
That's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful, Tracy. And it's amazing how, God works things all out in the end, and how everything just, we may not see it, we may not know it, but then in the end you're like, wow, it's just how it all just connects.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. It's remarkable. I wanted to close with just asking you another couple questions. And again, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing, your story and your parents' story. What prompted you to start writing these books? Is it your experience then with your mom and your dad? Is that what you said, I need to share this and what I went through because there's others? Or what was that moment? When was the moment that Tracy Crump said, I need to write this book and I need to write that, the generation story for Chicken Soup? Tell us about
Mhm.
that.
Well, I had actually been writing short pieces for years, and contributed a number of Chicken Soup stories. But it was at a conference, a writers' conference that I went to. I met an agent there, and he said I had kind of been toying with writing a book, but loved doing the short pieces. I loved writing one thing and finishing it and moving on to something else. And an agent there said, you know what? And I told him about a couple of story ideas I had for fiction books. And he said, fiction's fine. But he said, nonfiction really sells better. And he said, you've written so many devotions, you've published so many devotions. He said, why don't you write a devotional book? I thought, well, I could do that. It's one devotion at a time. And so it just was natural to me to go back to my nursing roots and also the caregiving experiences
Yeah.
that I'd had. And I saw quite a few things in nursing, as you can imagine, in ICU, that I felt like there were some miraculous things that God did there. And so I just wanted to just give people hope. The whole point of the book is hope. To let them know that no matter what they're going through, that God is going to stand by them, and that he may not heal them in this life, but he will heal them in the next life.
Hmm.
So, so that was my motivation, and of course, I used a lot of the caregiving stories too about both my mom and dad, and other people, their experiences too. That was the reason I wrote that book.
Wonderful. And last question, any feedback from any of the devotions or stories or books that you've written that really stand out to you or that might mean a little something extra?
Well, quite a few people actually have let me know how much that book meant to them, and it really, I think it's very telling when they not only buy a book for themselves, but then they want to go back and buy some for somebody else who's going through a health experience. And actually, recently, I have been blessed that some businesses have bought cases of the book to donate to cancer treatment centers or a cancer ministry that makes up baskets to give out to cancer patients or people who are going through chemo. There's a ministry online. I don't know if you're familiar with a ministry called Endurance. And right now, the name is not coming to me, but it was started by a professional baseball player. I don't know if you remember the story. I remembered it. Years ago, he developed cancer in his pitching arm. He pitched
Is
for a
it
major.
Dave Dravecki?
That's it. That's it. Thank
Okay.
you. And he and his wife started this ministry. They
Wow.
eventually had to amputate his arm, and he fell into a deep depression. But he credits God with pulling him from that
Yeah,
depression.
I
So,
remember that. It happened in the middle of a game when he
mhm,
went to throw the,
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
To pitch the ball, and it shattered his arm. That's
Wonderful.
right.
Wow.
So they purchased a case to give out. They send boxes to people who are undergoing not just cancer, but any kind of devastating illness, and they send out boxes of items and resources and things like that. And so they included one of my books in some of those. So that was a huge blessing. So just that alone, to me, says that God is using the stories to
Absolutely.
reach
Yeah.
others.
Well, through your experience, you're touching all these other lives. That's incredible. Well, we thank you so much for your time, Tracy. We're going to have the links to everything up on the screen and in the show notes, and we encourage people to get a copy of the book and, reach out to you if, they want to be a part of your ministry or, get some of these books for a ministry they're a part of. And we'll have you back on because I think you have another book coming out soon. Is that right?
I'm actually working on a book for caregivers.
Yes.
That's right.
Wonderful.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Tracy, and you have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Lance. I
You're
appreciate
welcome. Bye-bye.
it. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms or watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We'd also like to say thank you again to Tracy Crump for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time here at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.